Most people go through their entire lives never realizing that their results are not controlled by luck, not by the economy, not by other people, and not even by circumstances. They are controlled by a mental law so quiet, so subtle, that it operates whether you believe in it or not. I want you to listen very carefully now, because what I'm about to share with you is not a theory, not motivation, and not positive thinking. It is a law, just like gravity. You don't have to agree with it for it to work. You don't even have to understand it. It has been shaping your life since the day you became conscious, and it will continue shaping your future long after this moment is over. 99% of people never discover it, and because they never discover it, they live lives far below their potential, wondering quietly why things never seem to change. I learned this law by observing human beings for decades. I watched successful people and struggling people. I listened to what they said when they were winning and what they said when they were losing. I noticed how they spoke to others, but more importantly, how they spoke to themselves. And slowly, unmistakably, a pattern emerged. The people who moved forward in life were not smarter. They were not luckier. They were not born with better circumstances. They simply understood, consciously or unconsciously, how this mental law works. Everyone else was being ruled by it blindly. Here is the law, stated as simply as it can possibly be stated. You become what you think about most of the time, not what you wish for once in a while, not what you hope for late at night, not what you talk about publicly. You become what you consistently think about, emotionally accept, and mentally rehearse. Your mind is not a passive container. It is an active factory. It produces outcomes. It produces behavior. It produces habits. And eventually, it produces your entire life. Most people don't believe this because it feels too simple. They say, if it were true, everyone would be successful. And that is exactly the point. Everyone is successful at something. Some people are successful at building wealth. Others are successful at creating problems. Some are successful at maintaining health. Others are successful at staying sick. The mind does not judge the goal. It simply works on the dominant pattern it is given. From the moment you wake up in the morning, thoughts begin to flow into your awareness. Most of these thoughts are not new. They are repetitions. Yesterday's thoughts recycled. Last year's beliefs replayed. Old conclusions whispered again and again until they sound like facts. And because they sound familiar, you accept them. You don't question them. You don't challenge them. You live from them. That is why most people's lives look the same year after year, even though time passes. Let me tell you something that may shock you. You are not controlled by your environment. Your environment is largely a reflection of your inner world. Change the inner world, and given enough time, the outer world must change. It cannot do otherwise. This is not philosophy. This is cause and effect. Thought is the cause. Experience is the effect. And most people spend their lives trying to change the effect without ever touching the cause. Now, a man says, I want to be successful, but he constantly thinks about failure, competition, fear, and loss. Another says, I want peace, but mentally rehearses arguments, resentment, and regret all day long. Another says, I want confidence, but repeatedly tells himself stories of inadequacy and limitation. And then they are surprised by their results. The mental law does not respond to words. It responds to dominant mental images charged with emotion. Now understand this clearly. Your conscious mind sets the direction, but your subconscious mind does the work. The subconscious does not reason. It does not argue. It does not say this is good or this is bad. It accepts whatever you repeatedly impress upon it, and it works day and night to make it real. That is why habits are so powerful. That is why beliefs are so difficult to change. And that is why most people remain trapped in invisible prisons of their own thinking. Every time you think a thought, you strengthen a mental pathway. Think it again, and it becomes easier to think. Think it enough times, and it becomes automatic. Eventually, it becomes your default. And once something becomes your default way of thinking, it quietly runs your life. You don't even notice it anymore. You just call it reality. This is why two people can face the same situation and have completely different outcomes. One sees opportunity, the other sees danger. One moves forward, the other freezes. The difference is not the situation. The difference is the inner program. And programs, once installed, keep running until they are deliberately changed. Most people never deliberately change them. They inherit them from parents, from teachers, from society, from repeated emotional experiences. A child hears, money is hard to earn. Success is rare. People like us don't get ahead. Life is a struggle. And those ideas sink deep into the subconscious mind long before logic ever develops. Years later, the adult wonders why every financial opportunity feels uncomfortable, why success feels foreign, why struggle feels familiar. The law has been working perfectly all along. Let me be very clear about something else. Positive thinking alone does not work. Repeating empty phrases does not work. Pretending does not work. The mind responds to what you accept as true. That acceptance is created through repetition, emotion, and identity. You must begin to see yourself differently before your life can change consistently, not in a fantasy way, but in a disciplined, directed way. You see, the mind is goal-seeking. Give it a clear image, and it will move toward it. Give it a vague wish, and it will wander. Give it fear, and it will create reasons to stop. Give it confidence, and it will find paths forward. Most people never give their mind a clear, intentional target. They let the world choose their thoughts for them. News, social media, past experiences, other people's opinions all compete for control of their mental focus, and whatever wins, that competition becomes the architect of their future. Here is a question very few people ever ask themselves. What do I think about when I have nothing to do? Not when you are busy, not when you are distracted, but when you are alone, quiet, and unoccupied. Those thoughts are not random. They are your true mental residence, and whatever lives there long enough will eventually show up in your life. This is why most people live in quiet desperation. On the outside, everything may look fine, but inside, the same doubts repeat, the same fears whisper, the same limitations argue, and because these conversations are private, they go unchallenged. No one interrupts them, no one questions them, and so they solidify. The moment you understand this law, truly understand it, you realize that you have been given an extraordinary power. Not power over other people, not power over the world, but power over the only thing that truly determines your experience of life, the direction of your mind. This does not mean life becomes easy, it means life becomes intentional. You begin to notice your thoughts. Instead of being lost in them, you begin to ask, is this useful? Is this moving me toward the life I want, or away from it? And slowly, deliberately, you start to choose again, not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently. And consistency is what the subconscious responds to. Understand this as well. Change feels uncomfortable at first because the mind prefers the familiar, even when the familiar is painful. That is why people return to old habits, old relationships, old problems. They feel known, but growth requires tolerating temporary discomfort for long-term freedom. The mental law does not reward comfort, it rewards direction. Every great achievement in history began as a mental image held long enough and with enough conviction to become reality. Every failure followed the same pattern in reverse. Nothing happens first in the outside world, everything begins within. You may be thinking, if this law is real, why wasn't I taught this in school? Why doesn't everyone know it? Because it does not serve a distracted population to understand how powerful their own minds are. A person who controls their thinking is difficult to control in any other way, and most people never take the time to learn the mechanics of their own consciousness. But you are listening now, and listening is the first step. Awareness always comes before change. You cannot alter a pattern you cannot see. You cannot direct a force you do not acknowledge. From this moment forward, you have a choice, not to change everything at once, but to begin observing, guiding, and shaping your mental focus. This is not about denying reality. It is about choosing which part of reality you feed with your attention. Energy flows where attention goes, and what you feed grows. This mental law has been quietly shaping your life up to now. The question is not whether it will continue to do so. The question is whether it will do so by accident or by design. I will stop here for now. Once you become aware of this mental law, you also begin to see how carefully it has been hidden in plain sight. Not hidden by force, but hidden by distraction. People are kept busy reacting instead of directing. They are trained to respond to life instead of shaping it. And a reactive mind is never a powerful mind. It is a mind that is always one step behind its own potential. Think about this carefully. Most people spend their days responding to problems, responding to messages, responding to emotions, responding to circumstances. Very few people spend time creating an inner direction before the day begins, and yet they expect different results. That is like setting a ship to sail without a compass and being surprised when it drifts. The mental law does not care about your intentions. It responds to your dominant focus. You can intend to be disciplined, but if you repeatedly imagine failure, comfort, or escape, discipline will never become natural to you. You can intend to be wealthy, but if your internal dialogue is filled with scarcity, resentment toward success, or fear of responsibility, wealth will feel unsafe, and you will unconsciously push it away. Yes, push it away. That is something most people do not realize. They do not fail to achieve what they want. They actively resist it at a subconscious level, and the resistance always comes from identity. You do not get what you want in life. You get what you believe you are. are. Identity is the deepest level of this mental law. It is the story you tell yourself about who you are and what kind of life is normal for someone like you. If your identity says, I am the kind of person who struggles, then struggle will follow you no matter how hard you work. If your identity says, I am the kind of person who figures things out, then solutions will begin to appear even in difficult situations. Your actions follow your identity. Your habits follow your actions. Your results follow your habits. And then those results reinforce your identity. That is the loop most people live inside of, unaware that it can be interrupted. The interruption always begins with conscious thought, with awareness, with choosing what you repeatedly tell yourself when no one else is listening. This is not about lying to yourself. It is about upgrading the internal instructions you give your mind. Let me explain something crucial. Your subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. That is why fear feels real, even when nothing is happening. That is why anxiety can raise your heart rate without any physical threat. And that is why deliberate visualization, when done correctly, is so powerful. The mind begins to rehearse success before it ever appears on the outside. Most people visualize unconsciously. They imagine worst-case scenarios. They replay past failures. They anticipate rejection. They rehearse embarrassment. And then they wonder why confidence never arrives. Confidence is not something you wait for. It is something you build mentally before it ever shows up behaviorally. Understand this clearly. You cannot consistently act in ways that are inconsistent with your dominant self-image. Temporary effort may override it briefly, but eventually the mind pulls you back to what feels familiar. That is why sudden success often disappears for people who are not internally prepared for it. The external change outpaces the internal change, and the mental law restores balance by pulling them back to their old level. This is why real change must begin internally and be maintained there, not emotionally, but intellectually and imaginatively. You must begin to see yourself operating at a higher level before it becomes natural to do so. Now, let me address a misunderstanding. This mental law does not mean you never experience difficulty. It does not mean you never feel doubt. It does not mean you never fail. It means that difficulty does not define you, doubt does not stop you, and failure does not become your identity. You experience these things, but you do not live in them. Most people live in their problems. They talk about them, think about them, and emotionally relive them. And by doing so, they feed them. Problems grow when they are given too much mental energy. Solutions grow when attention shifts. This is not denial. This is discipline. The discipline of attention is the highest form of self-control. If you can control where your attention goes, you can control the direction of your life over time. Every day, you are programming your subconscious mind, whether you realize it or not, through repetition, through emotion, through imagery, through self-talk. The question is not whether you are programming it. The question is what program you are running. Most people run outdated programs installed by past experiences. They are living with mental software designed for survival, not for growth. And survival thinking will never produce an extraordinary life. It produces caution, hesitation, and conformity. Growth thinking, on the other hand, requires intentional input. You must choose what you read, what you listen to, what you repeatedly expose your mind to, because whatever you expose your mind to consistently becomes part of your internal environment, and your internal environment eventually becomes your external reality. This is why environment matters, but not in the way most people think. It is not about where you live. It is about what you allow into your mind on a daily basis. People underestimate the impact of constant negativity, constant comparison, constant fear-based information. They say it doesn't affect them, but their results tell a different story. The mental law is impartial. It works the same way for everyone. It does not care about your past. It does not care about your age. It does not care about your current circumstances. It only responds to the dominant patterns you impress upon it now. And here is the most hopeful part. Patterns can be changed, not overnight, not effortlessly, but deliberately, one thought at a time, one image at a time, one decision at a time. You do not need to control every thought. That is impossible. You only need to control the ones you dwell on, the ones you emotionally invest in, the ones you allow to define your identity. Start noticing your internal language. Notice how you describe challenges. Notice how you talk about yourself when something goes wrong. Those moments reveal the program you are running, and awareness gives you the chance to interrupt it. Instead of saying, "This always happens to me," you say, "This is temporary, and I am learning." Instead of saying, "I'm not good at this," you say, "I'm improving through practice." These are not just words. They are instructions, and instructions shape outcomes. Over time, these small shifts accumulate. The subconscious begins to accept a new normal. New behaviors feel less forced. New opportunities feel less threatening, and gradually, almost quietly, your life begins to move in a different direction. People around you may not notice immediately, but you will. You will feel it in your confidence, in your decisions, in your willingness to act without needing approval. That is when you know the law is working for you instead of against you. Most people wait for motivation to change. That is backwards. Action changes motivation. Thought directs action, and the law responds to consistency, not intensity. A small daily discipline maintained over time will outperform occasional bursts of effort every time. You do not need to become someone else. You need to become more deliberate about who you are becoming. That is the real work, and it begins in the privacy of your own mind. I will pause here. There is something else most people never understand about this mental law, and it may be the most important part of all. The law does not work on what you say you want. It works on what you expect. Expectation is far more powerful than desire. Desire is emotional. Expectation is structural. Desire hopes. Expectation prepares. When you expect something, you unconsciously adjust your behavior, your posture, your decisions, and your timing to match that expectation. When you merely desire something, you wait, and waiting is passive. The mind was not designed to wait. It was designed to move towards something. Most people secretly expect failure, even while publicly hoping for success. They say the right things, but inside, they brace themselves for disappointment, and the law responds to the brace, not the statement. It responds to the inner posture, not the outer words. This is why faith, in its truest form, is not emotional excitement. It is quiet certainty. It is calm expectation. It is the absence of internal resistance, and that absence creates speed. Think about how children learn. A child learning to walk does not analyze failure. They do not say, maybe this isn't for me. They fall, they stand, they try again. Their expectation is not questioned. Walking is assumed, and because it is assumed, it becomes inevitable. Adults lose this natural alignment with the mental law because they over-identify with past outcomes. They confuse it does not mean it must happen again, but the subconscious does know that unless you tell it otherwise through new patterns. Your past does not control your future unless you repeatedly consult it. Most people consult past constantly. They reference it in their thinking, their language, their decisions, and by doing so, they keep recreating it. The moment you stop asking, what has happened before, and start asking, what am I conditioning my mind to expect now? You claim control. Let me tell you something that sounds almost the quality of your life is largely determined by the quality of the questions you ask yourself. Ask powerless questions, and you get powerless answers. Ask questions, and the mind begins searching for solutions automatically. Instead of asking, why does this always happen to me? Ask, how can this serve my growth? Instead of asking, what if I fail? Ask, what if I succeed beyond my current imagination? The mind will answer whatever you ask it. It cannot help itself. That is how it is designed. Most people every day and then wonder why nothing changes. Now consider this. The mental law works best when thought, emotion, and action are aligned. When they are not aligned, you experience inner conflict. You want one thing, but feel another, and conflict slows everything down. Alignment does not mean perfection. It means direction. It means your thoughts generally point where your actions are moving. When alignment is present, progress feels natural. When it is absent, everything feels heavy. That heaviness most people feel is not life. It is resistance, and resistance is always internal before it becomes external. Another truth most people resist is this. You cannot hold negative images of yourself and expect positive results. The self-image always wins. You may temporarily outperform it, but you will eventually return to it unless it is deliberately raised. Self-image is not arrogance. It is self-concept. It is what you believe is normal for you. If success feels abnormal, you will sabotage it. If confidence feels unnatural, you will retreat from it. The mind seeks consistency above all else. That is why change requires repetition, not intensity. Repetition. You repeat a new idea until it becomes familiar. Familiarity creates comfort. Comfort creates identity. Identity creates behavior. Behavior creates results. People want instant transformation, but the mental law does not operate on impatience. It operates on persistence. Quiet, steady persistence. This is why daily rituals are so powerful. Not because of the ritual itself, but because of the message it sends to the subconscious. It says, this matters. This is who I am becoming. And the subconscious listens. What you read in the morning matters. What you listen to before sleep matters. What you mentally rehearse when you are alone matters. These are the moments when the subconscious is most receptive. Most people fill these moments with noise. They avoid silence because silence reveals their thoughts, but it is in silence that the real work is done. When you sit quietly and deliberately choose a higher quality thought, you are not wasting time. You are laying a foundation. Foundations are invisible, but they determine everything built upon them. Let me say this plainly. Discipline is not forcing yourself to do what you hate. Discipline is training your mind to value what serves you. When the value changes, behavior follows naturally. naturally. If you struggle with consistency, it is not a character flaw. It is a value conflict. Somewhere inside, the old identity still feels safer than the new one, and safety always wins until growth becomes familiar. So how do you make growth familiar? You expose your mind to it repeatedly. You normalize it. You surround yourself mentally with ideas, images, and examples that reflect who you want to become, not to compare yourself, but to recalibrate your sense of what is possible. The mind does not know what is possible. It knows what is familiar, and it expands familiarity through exposure. This is why association matters. Not just physical association, but mental association. Who do you listen to? Who do you allow to influence your thinking? Whose voices repeat in your head long after the conversation ends? You may think you are independent, but every mind is influenced. The question is whether the influence is deliberate or accidental. Deliberate influence is power. Accidental influence is drift. Most people drift. They drift through beliefs, through careers, through relationships, through life. And drift always leads to regret because it is unchosen. The mental law gives you the ability to choose, but choice requires awareness, and awareness requires honesty. You must be honest about what you have been thinking, honest about what you have been feeding your mind, honest about the identity you have been reinforcing, not to judge yourself, but to take responsibility. Responsibility is not blame, it is ownership, and ownership is freedom. The moment you say, my results are connected to my thinking, you gain leverage. You move from victim to participant, and participants can change direction. This law does not promise ease, it promises fairness. You get what you consistently cultivate mentally, nothing more, nothing less. That may sound harsh, but it is actually hopeful, because it means your future is not locked. It is being written right now by the thoughts you repeat, the images you accept, and the identity you reinforce. Most people wait for confidence to act, but confidence is built through aligned action taken despite uncertainty. Action feeds belief. Belief feeds identity. Identity feeds results. Everything feeds everything else. That is the system. And once you see the system, you can work with it instead of against it. You do not need to overhaul your entire life today. You only need to take control of the direction of your mind today. Tomorrow will take care of itself if today is directed. The law is always working. The only question left is this: will you use it consciously, or will it continue to use you unconsciously? I will pause here again. At this point, many people begin to feel a quiet resistance inside themselves, not because what I am saying is untrue, but because it implies responsibility, and responsibility makes the mind uncomfortable when it has been conditioned to explain life through excuses. The mind prefers explanations that remove personal power. It prefers to say it's the system, it's the timing, it's other people. Those explanations feel relieving, but they also feel heavy because they leave you helpless. The mental law does not allow helplessness and growth to coexist. One must give way to the other. Understand something very important. Taking responsibility for your thinking does not mean blaming yourself for the past. It means refusing to outsource your future. There is a profound difference. Blame looks backward, responsibility looks forward. Most people confuse the two, so they avoid both. But once you understand this law, you realize that the past only has as much power as you repeatedly give it through attention. Memory itself is neutral. Meaning is what gives it force, and meaning can be changed. Two people can remember the same failure. One uses it as proof of limitation. The other uses it as evidence of learning. The event is identical. The outcome is not. Meaning directs energy. This is why resilient people recover faster. They do not deny pain, but they refuse to build identity around it. They experience it, extract information, and move on. They do not rehearse it endlessly. They do not relive it emotionally, and therefore it does not become a pattern. Most people relive their past failures daily without realizing it, not consciously, but emotionally. A tone of hesitation, a feeling of caution, a subtle expectation that things will go wrong, and the law responds to that expectation precisely. Let me say this clearly. Your emotional state is a signal. It tells you what kind of thoughts you have been entertaining. Emotions are not random. They are feedback. If you consistently feel anxious, you are consistently thinking ahead with fear. If you feel resentful, you are living mentally in the past. If you feel hopeful, you are projecting positive expectation. If you feel calm, your thoughts are aligned. Instead of fighting emotions, learn from them. Ask what pattern of thought is producing this feeling. Then address the cause, not the symptom. This is where most people fail. They try to manage emotions without changing thoughts. That never works long term. Thought always creates emotion. Change the thought pattern, and the emotion follows. Now consider this. The mind cannot hold two opposing dominant thoughts at the same time. One will always win. Fear and faith cannot occupy the same mental space equally. Doubt and confidence cannot coexist at the same level. One must dominate. Your job is not to eliminate fear. Your job is to starve it of attention. When fear arises, acknowledge it, then redirect your focus deliberately, not angrily, not forcefully, calmly, like a trained professional. Professional thinkers are not emotional thinkers. They do not argue with their thoughts. They choose them. This is why emotional intelligence begins with mental discipline. You cannot feel your way into better thinking. thinking. You must think your way into better feeling. Most people do the opposite. They wait to feel inspired before they think constructively. Inspiration is unreliable. Discipline is dependable. And discipline, again, is not harshness. It is clarity. Clarity about who you are becoming. Clarity about what you will tolerate mentally. Clarity about what kind of inner dialogue you will no longer allow to run unchecked. Once you establish boundaries in your own mind, life begins to feel less chaotic. You are no longer reacting to every thought as if it were true. You are evaluating it. Is this thought useful? Is it aligned with where I am going? Does it strengthen or weaken me? These questions shift you from being controlled by the mind to directing it. This shift is subtle but powerful, and it marks the difference between people who remain stuck and people who evolve. Another truth the mental law reveals is this: time alone does not change anything. Awareness plus direction changes things. You can spend 10 years repeating the same mental patterns and get 10 years older without getting any wiser. Or you can spend 1 year consciously upgrading your thinking and experience a complete shift in your life trajectory. Time is neutral. Direction gives it meaning. Most people wait for time to fix things, but time only amplifies what already exists. If your thinking is confused, time deepens confusion. If your thinking is disciplined, time multiplies results. This is why the idea of patience is often misunderstood. Patience does not mean passivity. It means persistence without emotional agitation. It means continuing to align thought and action, even when results are not immediately visible. The mental law works invisibly at first. Seeds grow underground before they break the surface. If you dig them up every day to check progress, you kill them. Most people sabotage their own progress by constantly checking for results, doubting the process, and emotionally withdrawing when outcomes lag. They do not realize that doubt interrupts the impression being formed in the subconscious. Consistency is fragile in the early stages. It must be protected. This is why privacy matters when you are changing. Not everyone deserves access to your goals, your plans, your new identity. The wrong voices can reintroduce old programs before the new ones stabilize. Change is an internal construction project. Too many outside opinions slow it down. Let me also say this. This law does not respond to urgency. It responds to calm authority. The more desperate you are, the more resistance you create. Calm expectation signals confidence to the subconscious, and confidence accelerates alignment. When you stop chasing and start preparing internally, things begin to move faster externally. This feels counterintuitive to most people because they are addicted to effort without direction. Effort without direction exhausts. Direction without effort does nothing. But when direction and effort align, progress feels almost inevitable. This is why clarity is more important than intensity. A clear mind with moderate effort will outperform a confused mind working endlessly. Now understand the final layer of this mental law. What you repeatedly expect from yourself, you will eventually demand from yourself. And what you demand from yourself determines your standards, and standards determine destiny. Most people have low standards for their thinking. They allow self-criticism, doubt, and negativity to pass unchecked. They would never allow someone else to speak to them the way they speak to themselves, and yet they wonder why confidence feels unstable. Raising your standards internally changes everything, not overnight, but permanently. You decide that certain thoughts are no longer acceptable, not because they are bad, but because they are unproductive. And productivity thought is what shapes a productive life. The moment you do this, you step into a different category of individual, one who understands that the greatest freedom is mental freedom. This law has been operating your entire life. The only difference now is that you are beginning to see it, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. I will stop here again and now we come to the point where understanding must turn into application, because knowledge alone does not change a life. Awareness opens the door, but action is what carries you through it. And the action required by this mental law is far more subtle than people expect. It is not about dramatic gestures or sudden transformations. It is about quiet, daily alignment. Most people overestimate what they can change in a week and underestimate what they can change in a year. They attempt massive shifts, fail to sustain them, and then conclude that change does not work for them. But the law does not respond to extremes. It responds to rhythm. Rhythm is consistency without strain. It is the steady repetition of a chosen direction. If you want to know whether someone truly understands this law, do not listen to what they say when they are motivated. Listen to what they think when they are tired. Fatigue reveals the default program, and defaults are what shape lives. Your goal is not to eliminate negative thoughts. Your goal is to build a stronger dominant pattern that overrides them. When a new pattern is strong enough, old thoughts lose influence naturally. They fade due to lack of reinforcement. Most people fight their thoughts. That creates tension. Tension creates resistance. Resistance slows change. You do not fight thoughts. You replace them through repetition of something better to you. This is how habits are formed mentally before they are formed physically. Think of your mind as a garden. You do not argue with weeds. You plant something stronger and tend to it consistently. Eventually, the weeds have no space to grow. This is why clarity of direction matters so deeply. Vague intentions create weak mental impressions. Clear decisions create strong ones. When you decide, truly decide, that you are moving in a certain direction, your mind begins organizing resources around that decision. But decision must be final, not emotional. Emotional decisions fade. Final decisions restructure identity. Most people say, I will try. Trying is not a direction. It is hesitation disguised as effort. The subconscious does not respond to trying. It responds to choosing. When you choose, you close alternatives, and closing alternatives frees energy. This is uncomfortable at first because the ego likes options. Options feel safe, but options also dilute focus, and focus is the fuel of this mental law. Once you choose a direction, your thinking simplifies. You stop negotiating with yourself constantly, and this reduction in internal conflict creates momentum. Soon, momentum is not speed, it is continuity. Now consider this carefully. Every time you keep a small promise to yourself, your self-image strengthens. Every time you break one, it weakens. The size of the promise does not matter. The consistency does. Most people damage their self-trust daily in small, unnoticed ways. They say they will do something and then don't. They say they will stop something and then continue. And over time, the subconscious learns a painful lesson. My words mean nothing. Once that belief forms, motivation collapses, because why would the mind invest energy in instructions it does not believe? Rebuilding self-trust is one of the most important steps in applying this law, and it begins with making promises so small they are almost impossible to break, then keeping them daily. This sends a powerful signal to the subconscious. I am reliable, and reliability creates confidence. Confidence creates action. Action creates results. Most people search for confidence in achievements, but confidence comes first. Achievement follows. Confidence is not loud. It is calm certainty. It is the absence of internal argument. As you apply this law, you will notice something interesting. External validation begins to matter less, not because you don't care, but because your identity becomes internally anchored. You stop needing constant approval because your direction is clear. This is when you become dangerous to mediocrity. Mediocrity thrives on distraction, comparison, and doubt. When your mind is disciplined, those forces lose their grip. You begin to move differently, speak differently, decide differently, not dramatically, subtly, but consistently. And consistency is what the law amplifies. Now, let me address something people often misunderstand. Using this law does not make you selfish. It makes you responsible. A person who governs their own mind contributes more to the world, not less, because they are not constantly leaking energy through confusion and self-doubt. The most valuable people in any society are those who can think clearly under pressure. That clarity is not talent, it is trained. This law also teaches humility, because once you see how much of life is shaped internally, you stop blaming others. You stop waiting for permission, and you stop resenting success in others, because you understand the process behind it. Resentment is a signal of misunderstanding. It means the mind believes success is scarce or unfair. But once you understand the law, you see success as reproducible, and reproducibility removes envy. Now listen closely to this. Whatever you admire in others is evidence of something you are capable of developing. Admiration is not coincidence. It is recognition. The mind does not admire what it cannot conceive. When you see someone operating at a higher level, do not compare. Study. Comparison weakens. Study strengthens. Comparison asks, why not me? Study asks, how does this work? The second question activates growth. This mental law responds powerfully to modeling. When you repeatedly expose your mind to examples of discipline, courage, focus, and clarity, it begins to normalize those traits. They feel less distant, less foreign, more attainable. Again, familiarity creates possibility. This is why what you consume matters more than people admit, not morally, mechanically. The mind absorbs patterns. If you consume chaos, you normalize chaos. If you consume clarity, you normalize clarity. The law does not judge content. It integrates it. So be selective, not rigid. Selective. Now understand this final truth for this section. This law does not require belief. It requires participation. You do not need to convince yourself it is true. You only need to observe it working. Observation builds belief naturally. Begin watching how your thoughts affect your mood, how your mood affects your actions, how your actions affect your results, and how those results reinforce your thoughts. Once you see the loop, you can step into it consciously. At that point, life stops feeling random, not easy, but ordered, and order creates peace. Peace Peace is not the absence of challenge, it is the presence of direction. This is what 99% of people never discover, not because it is hidden, but because it requires stillness to notice. And most people are addicted to noise, but you are still here. You are listening, and that tells me something important. You are ready to move from unconscious participation to conscious creation. I will pause here once more. Now, let us talk about a critical aspect that most people completely overlook: the power of mental rehearsal. You see, your mind cannot tell the difference between a vividly imagined reality and an experienced reality when it comes to habit formation and identity. Every time you imagine yourself succeeding, calmly, deliberately, repeatedly, you are instructing your subconscious mind to treat success as familiar. You are planting seeds of inevitability. Most people never do this because imagination feels like fantasy, not preparation. They dismiss it as daydreaming, but in truth, it is the laboratory of achievement. The mind practices before the body acts, and the inner rehearsal determines the quality of the outer performance. When you rehearse fear, worry, and doubt, you are conditioning the same mind to manifest fear, worry, and doubt externally. When you rehearse courage, composure, and clarity, you are creating the blueprint for achievement. And because repetition builds identity, the line between imagined success and actual success becomes thinner every day. This is why elite performers, inventors, and world changers all engage in mental rehearsal before their achievements are visible to anyone else. They understand what the 99% do not. Success is created internally before it is manifested externally. Most people react to life. The elite create life internally and allow the external world to catch up. Reaction produces inconsistency, unpredictability, and frustration. Creation produces flow, confidence, and inevitability. It is not magic. It is precision. It is the law at work. Now consider this. Every habit you have, every skill you've learned, every limitation you believe in, started as repeated thoughts. Habits are nothing more than mental patterns expressed physically. Skills are internalized concepts, practiced enough to manifest reliably. Limitations are internal patterns repeated often enough to feel permanent. Once you see that, you understand the frightening and empowering truth. You are the author of every unseen pattern controlling your life. You have been creating results deliberately or accidentally, and the results are now obvious. The next step is deliberate creation. Most people are not taught how to create deliberately. They are taught to survive, to conform, to follow rules, to avoid risk. And survival thinking does not encourage the discovery of this mental law. It encourages distraction, repetition of the past, and acceptance of mediocrity. But once you discover the law, you see that growth, achievement, and fulfillment are predictable outcomes when mental focus is applied consistently and correctly. This is why discipline of thought is more valuable than talent. Talent is natural potential expressed randomly. Discipline of thought converts potential into consistent results. You can have enormous talent and waste it if your mental patterns are misaligned. You can have limited talent but achieve extraordinary results if your mental patterns are deliberate, focused, and repeated. The law is impartial. It does not favor genius. It favors mastery of the mind. Let us talk about resistance, because change is not linear. Every person attempting to redirect their thoughts will experience resistance. Old patterns do not surrender willingly. They feel familiar. They feel safe, and the mind will fight against new patterns until they become familiar. That is why many people give up too soon. They expect results without consistent internal repetition. They expect change without restructuring identity, and they are surprised when old habits return. This is the invisible mechanism that maintains the status quo for 99% of people. Understanding resistance allows you to anticipate it, observe it, and continue despite it. Observation is a form of power. To notice resistance without judgment is to remove its energy. Once resistance is observed, it becomes neutral. You continue your deliberate repetition, and the subconscious begins to accept the new dominant pattern. This is the essence of transformation. Quiet, subtle, relentless, invisible at first, undeniable later. Now, I must emphasize one more point. The mental law does not operate in isolation. It interacts with your decisions, your environment, and your daily actions. Thought creates direction. Action creates reinforcement. Environment creates support. If any of these are neglected, change becomes slower. Many people focus exclusively on action, thinking that effort alone will compensate for disorganized mental patterns. Others focus exclusively on thought, believing imagination is enough. The law demands both. Thought aligned with action, repeated consistently within a supportive environment. Neglect any element, and the system system slows, apply all consciously, and the system accelerates. One of the most powerful tools for this alignment is self-observation combined with self-instruction. Observe your habitual reactions. Observe the recurring internal dialogue. Observe what thoughts dominate when no one is watching. Then deliberately instruct the mind. This is the direction I choose. This is the identity I reinforce. This is the life I am building. The subconscious will obey the instructions, provided they are consistent, emotionally charged, and repeated long enough to feel familiar. Most people fail to realize how subtle this repetition must be. It does not require shouting affirmations. It does not require dramatic rituals. It requires consistency, quiet focus, attention applied repeatedly. The accumulation of small mental acts compounds into unstoppable internal momentum, and this momentum eventually manifests externally as achievement, influence, and fulfillment. Consider this: a single repeated thought over time is stronger than sporadic massive effort. Energy scattered without focus produces noise. Energy applied consistently produces results. The mental law amplifies focus. It multiplies repetition. It rewards consistency. This is why deliberate, patient work wins in the long term, even when the world is distracted, impatient, and chaotic. Most people are distracted by urgency. They chase the appearance of change, the excitement of immediate results, the praise of others. But this is superficial. The law is indifferent to urgency. It responds to constancy, daily, quietly, relentlessly. The person who directs their mental energy deliberately, even in the absence of motivation, eventually produces what others only dream of. Let us speak about identity once more because it is central. Your current identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are and what is normal for you, controls 99% of your thinking and behavior. To change your life externally, you must first expand your internal identity, not through wishful thinking, not through imitation, but through deliberate mental programming. By repeatedly rehearsing competence, courage, creativity, focus, and clarity until they become familiar, until the mind accepts them as normal, until they define who you are. Only then does behavior change automatically, effortlessly, and consistently. Most people underestimate the importance of identity. They chase results without upgrading who they believe they are, and they are constantly frustrated because their identity constrains their outcomes. They must either conform to the old identity or deliberately replace it with a new one. That is the work of conscious creation, and it is subtle, invisible, and profound. Once identity is upgraded internally, action becomes effortless. Challenges become opportunities, setbacks become lessons. Success becomes a natural consequence of alignment, not a series of random strokes of luck. The mental law rewards alignment, not heroics. It multiplies invisible preparation, not desperate attempts. And those who understand this become unstoppable because they are operating in harmony with a universal principle that governs thought, behavior, and result. I will pause here. Now, let us examine the role of patience in applying this law, because impatience is the single most common sabotage people create for themselves. Change never announces itself with fanfare. Transformations is slow, quiet, and often invisible. The mental law works in the background long before results appear externally. This is why so many people give up, thinking the law is not working. They confuse absence of visible evidence with absence of cause. The law has already begun its work. It responds to consistency, not appearance. Patience is not waiting. Patience is persistence applied intelligently and quietly. It is continuing the internal work despite the lack of immediate reward, trusting that the process is faithfully producing the inevitable outcome. Most people confuse impatience with effort. They push, strain, and struggle. The law responds not to strain, but to deliberate, steady, aligned action. A patient mind aligns with the process, observes it, and allows it to accumulate momentum internally before it manifests externally. Consider for a moment how often people rely on external motivation. They wait for inspiration, for mood, for encouragement from others, for circumstances to be perfect. That is wasted energy. External motivation is unreliable and fleeting. The mental law does not depend on mood. It depends on repeated internal alignment. Action comes first. Emotion follows. Habit comes from repetition, not bursts of enthusiasm. When you act consistently, according to your chosen mental direction, confidence grows. Motivation becomes a byproduct. Achievement becomes inevitable. Most people attempt the opposite, waiting to feel ready. That is why 99% remain stuck. Now, let us discuss focus, because nothing in the mental law is more powerful than concentrated attention. The mind can only create patterns when attention is consistently applied. Scattered attention produces scattered results. Multitasking dilutes your mental energy. Noise competes with clarity. Most people live in a constant state of divided attention. They listen to several voices at once: the media, social chatter, old memories, inner doubt, and wonder why progress is slow. Focus is a choice. Deliberate, sustained focus is a skill, and sustained focus magnifies the effect of the mental law exponentially. Where you place your attention, energy flows. Where energy flows, patterns form. Where patterns form, reality follows. Most people underestimate the value of small, deliberate acts repeated daily. They think grand gestures produce success. They do not. The law responds to quiet repetition over time. Small thoughts, repeated consistently, become the dominant program. Small behaviors, repeated consistently, become habits. Small habits, repeated consistently, become identity. Small identity changes, repeated consistently, transform your life. This is the secret the 99% never discover. They search for shortcuts, for instant gratification, for magic solutions. The law ignores shortcuts. It rewards constancy. Now let us examine the interaction of expectation and action. Expectation alone is not enough. Thought without action is empty. Action without expectation is directionless. But when expectation and action are combined, momentum multiplies. You act because you expect results. You expect results because you act consistently. This cycle feeds itself. It creates what seems inevitable. Most people act without expectation or expect without acting. That is why so few reach the heights of their potential. Another critical insight: the mental law magnifies identity. Your dominant self-concept determines what you notice, what you choose, and what you believe is possible. People with low self-concept notice obstacles, excuses, and limitations. People with high self-concept notice opportunities, solutions, and potential. And because the law amplifies what is dominant, your self-concept becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Upgrade identity internally, and external results follow. Ignore identity, and no amount of effort produces lasting change. Let us also consider the power of reflection. Most people avoid introspection because it reveals uncomfortable patterns, but reflection is essential for conscious alignment. Observing your thoughts, emotions, and habitual reactions allows you to interrupt unconscious patterns. It gives you the opportunity to deliberately replace them with chosen patterns. Reflection is the tool for deliberate creation. Without it, the mind remains reactive, and the law continues to shape your life unconsciously. Now think about the compounding effect. Every day, every repeated thought, every chosen action builds upon the previous day. The law does not reset. Momentum accumulates. Progress may be invisible for months or years, but the internal work compounds. A single year of deliberate, consistent mental alignment can produce results equivalent to decades of reactive, unfocused effort. Yet most people do not commit to this process. They underestimate time, overestimate urgency, and abandon the unseen work before it bears fruit. Next, let us discuss the role of environment, because although the law operates internally, it is influenced by what you allow into your mind. Surround yourself mentally with clarity, competence, and growth, and the law aligns naturally with these inputs. Surround yourself with distraction, confusion, and negativity, and your internal patterns will reinforce mediocrity. Environment is not destiny, but it is amplifier. It magnifies the dominant internal pattern for better or worse. That is why selective exposure, reading, listening, and observation are not optional. They are critical. Most people fail because they overexpose themselves to negative influences while underexposing themselves to constructive ones. They wonder why they feel weak, distracted, or discouraged, and they do not see the connection to the inputs they have been allowing into their mind. The law operates regardless. It amplifies what you feed it, whether positive or negative. Now consider habits. Because the law operates primarily through repeated patterns, your life is a collection of habits, most of which are unconscious. These habits were created by repeated mental impressions over time. If you want to change your life, you must first change the internal patterns that produce habits. External effort without internal alignment is temporary. Internal alignment produces external habit, which produces lasting results. Most people work on habits superficially, focusing only on behavior. The law responds first to thought, then to action, then to identity. Understanding this hierarchy is critical. Most people live in a state of accidental programming. They are reacting to external circumstances, societal expectations, and internal fears. Their patterns are inherited, reinforced, and repeated. They do not understand that every moment offers an opportunity to overwrite these patterns with deliberate, chosen ones. Once understood, the law allows you to replace accidental patterns with deliberate patterns. It is invisible work at first, but transformative over time. Let us now discuss persistence. The law does not reward intensity. It rewards consistency. A single burst of effort, no matter how heroic, does not create permanent change. Repeated, deliberate effort compounds. The mind responds to frequency, duration, and emotional charge. The law magnifies persistent alignment. Inconsistency produces weak patterns. Consistency produces identity. Identity produces inevitable results. Most people underestimate the compounding effect of small, deliberate daily acts. That is why the 99% never discover this principle. Can't do it. And finally, let us reflect on freedom. Once you internalize this law, you gain extraordinary freedom. Not freedom from effort, not freedom from challenges, but freedom from being unconsciously controlled. You no longer react to life as if it is happening to you. You consciously participate. You choose your thoughts, select your focus, and align your actions. The law amplifies your intentions. The world becomes an arena where deliberate mental creation can manifest. This is the ultimate power, and it is available to anyone who consistently applies the principles I have described. I will pause here. Now let us examine the power of emotional resonance in this process. Thoughts alone are not enough. The mental law responds most powerfully when thought is combined with feeling. Repeated thoughts, accompanied by emotion, create deep, lasting impressions on the subconscious. This is why imagining success passively does little. You must feel the success, not just see it. You must allow the mind to experience internally the state you wish to inhabit externally. The joy, the pride, the calm confidence of achievement. These feelings reinforce the mental patterns. The law then amplifies them into reality. Most people overlook the emotional component. They treat the mind as a calculator. It is not. It is a living system that thrives on experience, emotion, and repetition. Consider also the danger of mixed signals. When you tell yourself one thing but feel another, or act inconsistently with your internal image, the law registers the dominant internal pattern. Words without feeling are weak. Actions without belief are weak. Repeated internal contradictions strengthens old patterns, not new ones. That is why so many people fail to transform. They act superficially while their identity remains anchored in the old program. The mental law magnifies authenticity. Alignment matters more than effort. Now let us focus on resilience. Life will test you. Challenges, setbacks, and unexpected difficulties are inevitable. The mental law does not protect you from obstacles. It ensures that your dominant mental patterns shape your response to them. If your internal program is fear and doubt, obstacles become insurmountable. If your internal program is calm problem solving and expectation of success, obstacles become manageable, even instructive. Resilience is not a trait you are born with. It is an outcome of deliberate mental conditioning over time. The mind becomes resistant to disruption when its dominant patterns are constructive, confident, and aligned. Most people misunderstand adversity. They see it as punishment, but adversity is feedback. It is a mirror reflecting dominant mental patterns. Your reaction to challenges reveals the unconscious scripts you have been running. By observing your responses, you can identify the old patterns and replace them deliberately. This is the key to transformation. Most people react emotionally, reinforcing old patterns. Those who understand the law respond strategically, reinforcing new patterns. The difference is the difference between mediocrity and mastery. Let us also discuss the illusion of external control. People constantly attempt to control outcomes, circumstances, and other people, believing that effort outside themselves will change results. This is the illusion. The law operates primarily internally. Change what you direct in your own mind, and external circumstances naturally shift in response. Effort directed externally without internal alignment is weak. Effort directed internally, consistently, intentionally, and emotionally reinforced, produces predictable outcomes. Externally, most people labor endlessly, yet their lives remain largely unchanged because they have neglected the inner work. Now consider focus over intensity. Many attempt transformation through bursts of effort, sudden dieting, intense training, overnight learning. The law ignores intensity without consistency. A single heroic effort may produce temporary results, but cannot overwrite deep, repeated mental patterns. Consistency, quiet, repeated, deliberate practice is what programs the subconscious. The law amplifies this repetition, producing long-term change. Intensity is temporary. Alignment is permanent. We must also examine the role of self-talk. The language you use internally is the instruction manual for your subconscious. Every phrase you repeat internally, whether consciously or unconsciously, reinforces a mental pattern. Words of doubt, fear, or limitation strengthen old patterns. Words of clarity, confidence, and constructive expectation strengthen new patterns. Most people speak to themselves with far less care than they speak to strangers, yet the law magnifies these words. Self-talk is not trivial. It is the medium through which identity is shaped. Now let us address the importance of observation. To change the internal program, you must first observe it. This requires quiet, honest introspection. Notice the recurring thoughts that dominate when no one else is listening. Notice the habitual reactions to stress, disappointment, and opportunity. Observe without judgment. Observation neutralizes resistance and opens the door for deliberate instruction. instruction. Most people avoid this step because it is uncomfortable, but discomfort is temporary. Unconscious patterns are permanent. Observation followed by deliberate repetition of constructive patterns is how mastery is achieved. Next, let us focus on visualization. Mental rehearsal is the bridge between imagination and reality. When you vividly imagine the behaviors, decisions, and outcomes you desire, while emotionally experiencing them, you create a template for your subconscious to follow. The law cannot differentiate between vivid mental experience and physical experience when patterns are repeated consistently. This is why visualization works for athletes, leaders, and creators. They practice internally before performance externally. Most people skip this step, treating imagination as fantasy, but it is the training ground for inevitable success. Consider also the power of choice. Every thought is a choice. Every repeated mental pattern reinforces an outcome. Conscious selection of thought is the gateway to control. Most people allow default patterns to govern their lives, reactive, habitual, and limiting. Once you recognize your power to choose thought deliberately, you begin to steer your life instead of being steered by circumstance. The law responds to choice, magnifying whatever you select consistently. Now we must discuss repetition. Repetition is the engine of the mental law. Every deliberate thought, every repeated emotional experience, every consistent action creates cumulative momentum. Momentum may not be visible externally at first. The law works invisibly in the subconscious, forming patterns that eventually manifest externally. Most people abandon efforts before momentum develops because they seek immediate validation. Patience and repetition are essential. Momentum is the silent force behind all visible achievement. Next, let us examine identity once more, because it is the ultimate determinant of your results. Your identity, the self-image you hold as normal, habitual, and familiar, controls your dominant mental patterns, your habits, and your decisions. To change outcomes, you must upgrade identity internally. Temporary effort without identity change is unsustainable. Identity determines automatic behavior, and automatic behavior determines results. Most people chase results while neglecting identity, which explains why temporary success often vanishes. Deliberate, repeated internal work strengthens identity, which stabilizes and magnifies external outcomes. Finally, let us speak about freedom. Mastery of this mental law grants freedom, unlike any other. Not freedom from effort, challenge, or difficulty, but freedom from unconscious control, from reactive living, from habitual limitation. Once you learn to direct your thoughts, focus attention, align emotion, and reinforce identity, life becomes a canvas for deliberate creation. The law magnifies your internal alignment into external reality. The world ceases to be random. Your results reflect your inner architecture. That is the ultimate power, available to anyone willing to apply these principles consistently, patiently, and deliberately. I will pause here. Now, let us explore the often overlooked principle of incremental mastery. Most people desire transformation as though it is instantaneous. They expect monumental results overnight, but the mental law operates through accumulation, not sudden leaps. Every thought, every decision, every aligned action contributes to an invisible architecture that eventually supports extraordinary outcomes. Each repetition strengthens neural pathways, reinforces identity, and creates momentum. The law does not require speed, it requires consistency. Incremental mastery compounds silently, but the results are irreversible once the pattern has been established. This is why patience and daily alignment are the cornerstones of deliberate success. Consider how attention functions as currency in this system. Where you place your attention, you invest energy. Most people squander attention on distractions, negative emotions, and repetitive mental noise. The law magnifies the patterns formed by repeated attention. Attention to fear strengthens fear. Attention to opportunity strengthens opportunity. Attention to clarity strengthens clarity. Conscious attention is not trivial. It is the input through which the subconscious receives instruction. Neglect it, and the law defaults to reinforcing whatever dominant patterns exist, often mediocrity. Apply it deliberately, and you create unstoppable momentum. Now, let us examine the subtleties of internal dialogue. Your inner voice, the words you speak to yourself, shapes your mental landscape. It programs expectations, reinforces identity, and defines possibility. Most people speak internally in criticism, doubt, and fear. This reinforces old patterns and maintains limitation. Deliberate internal dialogue, repeated consistently and emotionally, rewires the subconscious. Words like "I am capable," "I am prepared," "I am consistent" are not affirmations. They are instructions. The law obeys these instructions with absolute precision. precision, provided they are repeated until familiarity becomes identity. We must also consider the alignment of thought, emotion, and action. Misalignment is the primary cause of stagnation. When you desire one outcome but feel another, or when your actions contradict internal expectation, resistance emerges. The law magnifies the dominant pattern, which in this case is inconsistency. When thought, emotion, and action are aligned, progress becomes effortless. The external world begins to mirror internal harmony. Resistance diminishes. Momentum builds naturally. Alignment is more important than raw effort because the law responds to coherence, not struggle. Next, let us examine the role of self-trust. Every promise you make to yourself is a seed for identity. Keeping small promises builds credibility internally. Breaking them erodes self-trust. Most people underestimate this. They believe external achievements build confidence, but internal self-trust precedes lasting accomplishment. The law magnifies internal credibility into observable competence. Once self-trust is solid, challenges are met without hesitation, decisions are executed without doubt, and effort is sustained consistently. Without it, progress is fragile, easily disrupted by circumstance or emotion. Now, consider the principle of feedback. Life constantly provides data, results, reactions, challenges, and opportunities. Most people ignore this feedback, reacting emotionally rather than strategically. The law operates silently on internal patterns, and feedback allows you to refine those patterns consciously. Observation of results without judgment, combined with deliberate adjustment of thought and action, accelerates alignment. Those who learn to interpret feedback accurately gain a multiplier effect. Those who ignore it remain at the mercy of default patterns. Feedback is not criticism, it is information, and the law magnifies whatever the mind chooses to act upon. Another crucial concept is the normalization of growth. Most people resist change because it feels unnatural. They cling to familiar limitations, even when those limitations are painful. The law magnifies the patterns that dominate familiarity. To change, growth must become familiar internally before it manifests externally. This requires repeated mental rehearsal, emotional reinforcement, and consistent action until the new pattern feels normal. Only then does external behavior align automatically. Resistance is temporary. Normalization is permanent. Now, let us examine expectation in combination with observation. Expectation alone is insufficient. Observation alone is insufficient. Action alone is insufficient. The law multiplies the effect when all three are combined. Expect what you desire. Observe current patterns without judgment and act consistently toward alignment. The interaction of these three forces produces momentum that eventually manifests as visible success. Most people apply only one or two, never all three. That is why so few ever achieve consistent results. Next, let us consider the influence of association. The minds you allow into your environment through conversation, media, and exposure shape dominant patterns. The law amplifies repeated mental patterns, whether internally generated or externally introduced. Surround yourself with clarity, competence, and focus, and these patterns become internalized. Surround yourself with chaos, distraction, and negativity, and old limitations are reinforced. Most people underestimate the effect of mental environment. It is not optional, it is a multiplier. Now, let us speak about internal rehearsal again, because it is the bridge between thought and identity. Deliberate visualization, emotional engagement, and consistent mental practice create a template for behavior. When rehearsed sufficiently, this template becomes automatic. The subconscious then executes actions in alignment with the rehearsed pattern. This is how mastery of any skill, behavior, or outcome is achieved. Most people dismiss mental rehearsal as fantasy, but it is the laboratory of success. Finally, let us examine the compounding effect over time. Every repeated thought, every deliberate action, every reinforced internal pattern accumulates into unstoppable internal momentum. Initially invisible, this momentum eventually manifests externally as skill, influence, and achievement. The law magnifies persistence exponentially. Small efforts, repeated consistently, produce results far greater than massive, sporadic bursts of effort. Most people fail to appreciate the power of compounding mental work. They abandon efforts too early, never seeing the exponential payoff. Once you integrate attention, observation, deliberate action, self-trust, emotional reinforcement, alignment, and consistent rehearsal, you unlock the full power of this law. Results become inevitable because the law amplifies coherence and consistency. Resistance diminishes, momentum builds, identity stabilizes, and life becomes a predictable reflection of deliberate internal creation rather than random circumstance. I will pause here, Doc. Now let us examine the principle of invisible accumulation. Most people look for visible evidence of change before committing to effort. They want immediate proof that the law is working, yet the law operates silently, invisibly, shaping neural pathways, reinforcing identity, and creating internal momentum long before results are seen externally. This is why patience is essential. The subconscious does not recognize calendar dates, deadlines, or external pressure. It recognizes repetition, emotional resonance, and alignment. Invisible accumulation is the quiet engine that drives visible transformation. Most people give up before it reaches critical mass. Those who persist observe the invisible work, trust the process, and ultimately manifest results that seem sudden but are in fact the product of years of quiet internal mastery. Let us now discuss deliberate selection of influence. Every book you read, every conversation you engage in, every piece of media you consume is programming. The law magnifies repeated exposure. Most people are unconsciously programmed by distraction, fear, or negativity. Deliberate consumption of ideas that reinforce clarity, focus, and constructive patterns accelerates mastery. Exposure must be intentional, consistent, and emotionally engaging. This is why elite performers guard their mental environment fiercely. They understand that the law does not discriminate. It amplifies whatever dominates the mind. Next, consider emotional calibration. Thought must be accompanied by congruent emotion. Rehearsed actions without feeling are weak. Imagined success without emotional engagement is weak. The law responds to emotional reinforcement because emotion charges neural patterns with intensity, making them more likely to dominate. Most people ignore this, treating transformation as intellectual alone. Emotion is the fuel. Repetition is the structure. Alignment is the mechanism. Combine all three and the law executes with precision. Let us examine internal dialogue once more. Words spoken internally, habitually, emotionally, repeatedly, create the architecture of identity. Doubt reinforces limitation. Fear reinforces hesitation. Clarity reinforces focus. Confidence reinforces action. Most people speak to themselves carelessly, reinforcing mediocrity without realizing it. Conscious, deliberate, emotionally charged internal dialogue rewires the subconscious, creating dominant patterns that eventually manifest externally. The law magnifies internal authority. Your words, once repeated and believed, shape your reality. Now let us discuss consistency versus intensity. Most people believe in bursts of effort, occasional heroics, dramatic gestures, sudden transformations. The law ignores intensity without repetition. Small, deliberate, consistent effort compounds into identity. Identity drives habitual behavior. Habit produces results. Intensity is temporary. Alignment and repetition are permanent. This is why persistent, patient work always beats sporadic brilliance. The 99% fail because they underestimate the cumulative power of quiet, consistent internal effort. Next, consider the principle of feedback integration. Life provides constant feedback, results, reactions, opportunities, challenges. Observation allows adjustment of mental patterns. Reflection without judgment identifies misalignment. Action informed by feedback accelerates momentum. Most people react emotionally to feedback, reinforcing old patterns. Those who observe and adjust consciously use the law as a multiplier, turning experience into deliberate internal reinforcement. Feedback is information, not judgment. The law magnifies what you act upon. Now, let us examine identity once again. Identity is the filter through which thought, emotion, and action flow. Your dominant self-concept determines what you notice, what you focus on, and what you believe is possible. To change outcomes, you must upgrade identity internally. Temporary effort without identity shift produces fragile results. Repeated, deliberate internal work reshapes identity. Once identity is aligned with desired outcomes, behavior flows naturally. The law magnifies consistent identity into inevitable results. Consider resilience. Challenges are inevitable. The mental law does not remove obstacles. It magnifies the patterns you apply to overcome them. Fear-based responses produce suffering. Aligned, composed responses produce growth. Repeated alignment builds resilience. Those who internalize this law become unshakable because their internal patterns dominate external circumstances. Resistance is temporary. Momentum is permanent. Most people fail because they allow external events to dictate internal patterns rather than consciously guiding thought, emotion, and action. Let us explore deliberate mental rehearsal again. The subconscious cannot differentiate vivid, repeated imagination from lived experience. Rehearsing success, focus, and composure internally prepares the mind for automatic execution externally. Most people dismiss this as fantasy. In truth, it is the laboratory of achievement. Emotionally charged rehearsal strengthens neural pathways, reinforces identity, and aligns behavior. This is how mastery is achieved without struggle. The law magnifies rehearsal into reality. Now, let us consider expectation and alignment. Expectation alone is insufficient. Repetition alone is insufficient. Observation alone is insufficient. The law multiplies outcomes. When expectation, repetition, and alignment converge, you expect, observe, rehearse, and act consistently. Momentum builds, identity stabilizes, habits form, results manifest. Most people fail because they isolate these components, never combining them into coherent internal systems. Those who do experience accelerated, predictable outcomes. Finally, let us examine the freedom granted by mastery of this law. Freedom is not absence of effort, challenge, or difficulty. It is freedom from unconscious reaction, limitation, and habitual failure. Deliberate internal alignment creates external predictability. You choose thoughts, you focus attention, you reinforce identity, you observe, rehearse, and adjust. The law magnifies these internal choices into consistent external manifestation. The world ceases to be random. Life becomes an arena for deliberate creation. Those who understand and apply this law gain mastery over self and therefore over circumstance. I will pause here. Nakama, let us discuss the often overlooked principle of mental alignment with purpose. Most people live fragmented lives, moving from task to task, thought to thought, without a coherent internal direction. The law amplifies whatever is dominant internally. If your internal patterns are scattered, your external results will be chaotic. If your internal patterns are aligned with purpose, clarity, and deliberate focus, the law magnifies them into extraordinary outcomes. Purpose is the anchor, focus is the fuel, alignment is the mechanism. Without purpose, effort is wasted. With purpose, effort compounds invisibly into momentum that eventually manifests externally. Most people underestimate how critical internal purpose is in combination with repetition and emotional reinforcement. Consider also the principle of internal calibration. Your mind constantly adjusts based on repeated mental signals. If you rehearse fear, uncertainty, or doubt, the mind strengthens those patterns. If you rehearse clarity, composure, and constructive expectation, the mind strengthens those patterns. Repeated calibration of internal thought and feeling reshapes habitual responses to life. Most people leave this calibration to chance, unconsciously reinforcing patterns that limit them. Conscious calibration is deliberate internal programming. The law magnifies whatever is consistently fed into this system. Now let us examine the role of observation as a tool of conscious creation. To direct your life intentionally, you must first observe it without judgment. Observe habitual thoughts, recurring emotions, patterns of reaction, and daily choices. Observation creates awareness, and awareness creates leverage. Once you notice internal patterns, you can apply deliberate repetition of constructive alternatives. Observation without judgment neutralizes resistance. Observation with action engages the law fully. Most people avoid observing themselves because it reveals uncomfortable truths. Yet discomfort is temporary. Unconscious patterns are permanent unless intentionally altered. Next, let us discuss the interaction of identity and action. Identity is the internal blueprint. Action is the external manifestation. The law amplifies actions that are consistent with identity. Actions inconsistent with identity create tension and resistance. To produce lasting results, identity must precede consistent action. Temporary action without identity shift is fragile. Deliberate, repeated alignment of identity with desired behavior ensures external outcomes are automatic, effortless, and consistent. Most people attempt the reverse. They chase action and results without establishing identity. That is why 99% struggle to sustain progress. Let us also examine emotional reinforcement. Thought alone does not impress the subconscious sufficiently. Emotion is the catalyst that deepens the imprint. Rehearse mentally with emotional engagement. Feel the composure, confidence, and success. Engage pride, calm certainty, and deliberate anticipation of outcome. The law magnifies emotionally charged patterns far more than neutral thought alone. Most people ignore emotional reinforcement, assuming intellect is enough. It is not. Emotion drives intensity, and intensity creates dominance in the subconscious. Now consider the principle of incremental focus. Most people attempt dramatic shifts, sudden transformations, or large-scale changes. The law does not respond to extremes without repetition. It responds to gradual, deliberate focus applied consistently. Small improvements, small mental rehearsals, small aligned actions repeated daily compound into irreversible momentum. The law multiplies the effect of incremental, consistent internal work far beyond occasional heroic effort. This is why mastery often appears slow externally, but is unstoppable internally. Next, consider the power of selective attention. Where you place your attention, you invest energy. Most people scatter attention across distractions, worry, and reactive thought. The law amplifies the patterns that dominate your attention. Focus deliberately on growth, clarity, and constructive action. Repetition of attentive focus strengthens dominant mental patterns. Neglect focus, and the law defaults to reinforcing whatever whatever is already habitual, often mediocrity. Conscious focus is not optional. It is the mechanism through which the law produces results. Now, let us discuss persistence in alignment. Effort alone is insufficient. Repetition alone is insufficient. Persistence in aligned thought, emotional reinforcement, and deliberate action is what the law magnifies. Consistent application, not intensity, produces long-term transformation. The 99% abandon efforts before momentum compounds. Those who persist quietly, deliberately, and with patience witness the exponential power of the law. Persistence is the bridge between internal work and visible external mastery. Consider also the invisible power of feedback loops. Every action, thought, and emotional response generates data. Observation of this feedback allows adjustment, refinement, and reinforcement of dominant patterns. Most people ignore feedback, reacting emotionally and reinforcing old limitations. Those who observe, reflect, and adjust consciously allow the law to magnify progress exponentially. Feedback is not criticism, it is information. Deliberate interpretation converts observation into momentum. Next, let us explore normalization of success internally. Most people resist change because it feels unfamiliar. The law magnifies what is familiar. To achieve lasting change, the mind must internalize new patterns until they feel normal. Repeated rehearsal, emotional engagement, and consistent action normalize growth internally. Resistance is temporary. Familiarity is permanent. Once normalized, external behavior aligns automatically. This is why elite performers appear effortlessly competent. Their internal patterns have been normalized through consistent application. Now, consider the compounding effect over time. Every repeated thought, deliberate action, and emotionally reinforced pattern accumulates into unstoppable internal momentum. This momentum may be invisible at first. The law does not measure time. It measures consistency and emotional reinforcement. Momentum eventually manifests externally as skill, influence, achievement, and fulfillment. Most people abandon efforts too early, never experiencing the exponential payoff. Those who persist witness transformation that appears sudden but is actually the result of long, deliberate internal work. Finally, let us speak about ultimate freedom. Mastery of this mental law grants extraordinary freedom. Not freedom from challenge, difficulty, or effort, but freedom from unconscious limitation. You choose thoughts, you focus attention, you reinforce identity, you observe, rehearse, and adjust. The law magnifies these internal alignments into external mastery. Life ceases to feel random. The world becomes a canvas for deliberate creation. The 99% never discover this because they remain reactive. Those who do discover it gain control, clarity, and inevitable momentum. I will pause here. Now, let us examine the role of clarity in activating this mental law. Most people operate with vague desires and undefined goals. They know what they want in general, but they do not specify it. They do not internalize it, and they do not rehearse it with emotion. The law amplifies dominant internal patterns, but vague, undefined patterns are weak. Clarity transforms desire into directive. It allows the subconscious to recognize a pattern worth reinforcing. Repeated mental focus, emotionally charged and precisely defined, creates unshakable internal alignment. Most people fail because their mental instructions are foggy, inconsistent, or diluted by distraction. Clarity is not optional, it is essential. Consider also the principle of internal reinforcement through observation. Every thought, action, and response is feedback. Observing your own reactions without judgment allows the identification of patterns that require strengthening or alteration. Most people ignore observation, letting unconscious patterns dominate. Conscious observation neutralizes resistance and provides an opportunity for deliberate reinforcement of constructive mental patterns. This is how mastery becomes intentional rather than accidental. Now let us examine the importance of emotional rehearsal alongside mental rehearsal. Visualization alone is insufficient. The mind responds most strongly when thought and feeling converge. You must feel the confidence, composure, and certainty of success internally. You must emotionally rehearse the behavior, decision, and response you wish to embody externally. Repetition of emotionally charged mental rehearsal reshapes neural pathways, reinforces identity, and primes behavior. Most people neglect the emotional component, believing intellectual focus is enough. It is not. Emotion is the accelerator of the law, giving intensity to repetition. Next, consider alignment of action with internal pattern. Thought and emotion alone are insufficient. Behavior must follow internal direction consistently. Misalignment creates tension and resistance. Action inconsistent with internal identity reinforces old patterns. Deliberate, consistent action, aligned with chosen internal patterns, activates the law fully, producing visible external results. Most people attempt behavior change without identity alignment, producing frustration and temporary success at best. Alignment is the bridge between internal rehearsal and external manifestation. Now let us discuss the concept of compounding momentum. Every repeated thought, every aligned action, every emotionally reinforced pattern contributes to invisible internal accumulation. This momentum eventually becomes unstoppable, manifesting externally as skill, confidence, influence, and achievement. Most people give up too soon, never witnessing the exponential payoff of sustained internal effort. The law magnifies compounding momentum silently, patiently, and consistently. Persistence is the multiplier that transforms internal effort into external mastery. Consider also the principle of selective input. The information, conversation, media, and environments you allow into your mind or programming. Repetition of negative, distracting, or fear-based input reinforces limiting patterns. Repetition of constructive, empowering, and focused input strengthens growth patterns. The law amplifies whatever dominates the mind. Conscious selection of input is not optional. It is a lever of extraordinary influence over internal patterns. Most people allow default programming, unconsciously reinforcing limitation and distraction. Next, let us examine patience as a critical factor. The law does not operate on urgency. It operates on consistent repetition and alignment. Results may be delayed, invisible, or gradual. Patience allows you to persist despite the absence of immediate evidence. Most people abandon efforts prematurely because they equate lack of immediate reward with failure. In reality, the law is accumulating, compounding, and solidifying internal momentum during this period. Patience is not passive waiting. It is deliberate, aligned persistence despite delayed visibility. Now consider the principle of alignment of thought, emotion, and expectation. Misalignment creates resistance. Thought without expectation is weak. Expectation without aligned action is weak. Emotion without rehearsal is weak. Alignment of all three creates coherent internal momentum that the law magnifies into automatic, consistent external results. Most people isolate these elements, never combining them intentionally. Those who do experience accelerated mastery that appears effortless externally but is carefully constructed internally. We must also examine resilience as a byproduct of consistent internal alignment. Challenges, setbacks, and unexpected circumstances are inevitable. The law does not remove obstacles. It magnifies internal patterns in response to those obstacles. If your internal patterns are aligned, obstacles are managed, lessons are learned, and momentum continues. If internal patterns are reactive, fear-based, or scattered, obstacles become amplified suffering. Resilience is not innate. It is the result of deliberate internal reinforcement and alignment repeated consistently over time. Now, let us discuss the hidden power of repetition in shaping identity. Every repeated thought, every internally rehearsed scenario, every deliberate action contributes to identity formation. Temporary effort produces temporary results. Repeated, consistent, and aligned internal work reshapes identity permanently. Identity dictates automatic behavior. Automatic behavior dictates results. The law magnifies identity into external reality. Most people fail because they focus on external change without internal alignment, producing fleeting success. Permanent transformation begins internally. Next, consider the power of expectation coupled with observation. Expectation alone is insufficient. Observation alone is insufficient. The law magnifies outcomes when expectation, observation, and action converge. Expect what you desire. Observe patterns without judgment and act consistently toward alignment. Momentum compounds. Identity stabilizes. Habits form. Results manifest naturally. Most people apply only fragments of this combination, which is why 99% never sustain lasting achievement. Finally, let us speak about ultimate freedom granted by mastery of this law. Freedom is not absence of challenge, difficulty, or effort. It is freedom from unconscious limitation, reactive living, and habitual frustration. Once internal patterns are aligned deliberately, consistently, and emotionally reinforced, external outcomes naturally reflect internal mastery. Life becomes predictable, coherent, and subject to deliberate creation. The law magnifies internal consistency into external inevitability. Those who understand and apply it gain extraordinary control, clarity, and momentum over their lives. I will pause here. Now, let us examine the role of clarity in activating this mental law. Most people operate with vague desires and undefined goals. They know what they want in general, but they do not specify it. They do not internalize it, and they do not rehearse it with emotion. The law amplifies dominant internal patterns, but vague, undefined patterns are weak. Clarity transforms desire into directive. It allows the subconscious to recognize a pattern worth reinforcing. Repeated mental focus, emotionally charged and precisely defined, creates creates unshakable internal alignment. Most people fail because their mental instructions are foggy, inconsistent, or diluted by distraction. Clarity is not optional. It is essential. Consider also the principle of internal reinforcement through observation. Every thought, action, and response is feedback. Observing your own reactions without judgment allows the identification of patterns that require strengthening or alteration. Most people ignore observation, letting unconscious patterns dominate. Conscious observation neutralizes resistance and provides an opportunity for deliberate reinforcement of constructive mental patterns. This is how mastery becomes intentional rather than accidental. Now let us examine the importance of emotional rehearsal alongside mental rehearsal. Visualization alone is insufficient. The mind responds most strongly when thought and feeling converge. You must feel the confidence, composure, and certainty of success internally. You must emotionally rehearse the behavior, decision, and response you wish to embody externally. Repetition of emotionally charged mental rehearsal reshapes neural pathways, reinforces identity, and primes behavior. Most people neglect the emotional component, believing intellectual focus is enough. It is not. Emotion is the accelerator of the law, giving intensity to repetition. Next, consider alignment of action with internal pattern. Thought and emotion alone are insufficient. Behavior must follow internal direction consistently. Misalignment creates tension and resistance. Action inconsistent with internal identity reinforces old patterns. Deliberate, consistent action aligned with chosen internal patterns activates the law fully, producing visible external results. Most people attempt behavior change without identity alignment, producing frustration and temporary success at best. Alignment is the bridge between internal rehearsal and external manifestation. Now let us discuss the concept of compounding momentum. Every repeated thought, every aligned action, every emotionally reinforced pattern contributes to invisible internal accumulation. This momentum eventually becomes unstoppable, manifesting externally as skill, confidence, influence, and achievement. Most people give up too soon, never witnessing the exponential payoff of sustained internal effort. The law magnifies compounding momentum silently, patiently, and consistently. Persistence is the multiplier that transforms internal effort into external mastery. Consider also the principle of selective input. The information, conversation, media, and environments you allow into your mind are programming. Repetition of negative, distracting, or fear-based input reinforces limiting patterns. Repetition of constructive, empowering, and focused input strengthens growth patterns. The law amplifies whatever dominates the mind. Conscious selection of input is not optional. It is a lever of extraordinary influence over internal patterns. Most people allow default programming, unconsciously reinforcing limitation and distraction. Next, let us examine patience as a critical factor. The law does not operate on urgency. It operates on consistent repetition and alignment. Results may be delayed, invisible, or gradual. Patience allows you to persist despite the absence of immediate evidence. Most people abandon efforts prematurely because they equate lack of immediate reward with failure. In reality, the law is accumulating, compounding, and solidifying internal momentum during this period. Patience is not passive waiting. It is deliberate, aligned persistence despite delayed visibility. Now consider the principle of alignment of thought, emotion, and expectation. Misalignment creates resistance. Thought without expectation is weak. Expectation without aligned action is weak. Emotion without rehearsal is weak. Alignment of all three creates coherent internal momentum that the law magnifies into automatic, consistent external results. Most people isolate these elements, never combining them intentionally. Those who do experience accelerated mastery that appears effortless externally but is carefully constructed internally. We must also examine resilience as a byproduct of consistent internal alignment. Challenges, setbacks, and unexpected circumstances are inevitable. The law does not remove obstacles. It magnifies internal patterns in response to those obstacles. If your internal patterns are aligned, obstacles are managed, lessons are learned, and momentum continues. If internal patterns are reactive, fear-based, or scattered, obstacles become amplified suffering. Resilience is not innate. It is the result of deliberate internal reinforcement and alignment repeated consistently over time. Now, let us discuss the hidden power of repetition in shaping identity. Every repeated thought, every internally rehearsed scenario, every deliberate action contributes to identity formation. Temporary effort produces temporary results. Repeated, consistent, and aligned internal work reshapes identity permanently. Identity dictates automatic behavior. Automatic behavior dictates results. The law magnifies identity into external reality. Most people fail because they focus on external change without internal alignment, producing fleeting success. Permanent transformation begins internally. Next, consider the power of expectation coupled with observation. Expectation alone is insufficient. insufficient. Observation alone is insufficient. The law magnifies outcomes when expectation, observation, and action converge. Expect what you desire, observe patterns without judgment, and act consistently toward alignment. Momentum compounds, identity stabilizes, habits form, results manifest naturally. Most people apply only fragments of this combination, which is why 99% never sustain lasting achievement. Finally, let us speak about ultimate freedom granted by mastery of this law. Freedom is not absence of challenge, difficulty, or effort. It is freedom from unconscious limitation, reactive living, and habitual frustration. Once internal patterns are aligned deliberately, consistently, and emotionally reinforced, external outcomes naturally reflect internal mastery. Life becomes predictable, coherent, and subject to deliberate creation. The law magnifies internal consistency into external inevitability. Those who understand and apply it gain extraordinary control, clarity, and momentum over their lives. I will pause here. Now, let us examine the often underestimated role of habitual mental architecture. Every thought repeated, every emotionally reinforced image rehearsed, and every action consistent with internal alignment contributes to a network of mental patterns that dictate behavior and reaction automatically. Most people underestimate this. They act as if each moment is isolated, ignoring the cumulative effect of repeated mental activity over months and years. The law magnifies these internal patterns into external manifestation, slowly, quietly, but inevitably. Habits, once internalized, operate automatically. This is why conscious design of internal habits is more critical than external effort alone. Consider the principle of mental economy. The mind naturally seeks efficiency. It automates repeated patterns, freeing energy for other tasks. When you deliberately repeat constructive patterns with clarity and emotional reinforcement, these become automated, effortless, and dominant. Conversely, if fear, doubt, or distraction dominate, those patterns automate instead. Most people leave their mental economy unregulated, allowing unconscious repetition of limitation. The law magnifies whatever patterns dominate, making careful design of habitual mental architecture a cornerstone of deliberate success. Now, let us examine the interaction between expectation and momentum. Expectation is not passive hope. It is a deliberate, internalized belief in the inevitability of aligned outcomes. Momentum is the accumulation of repeated, emotionally reinforced mental patterns and consistent action. When expectation and momentum converge, results are magnified exponentially. Most people separate these elements, expecting results without building momentum, or attempting action without expectation. Those who integrate both experience the full acceleration of the law, producing outcomes that seem effortless, inevitable, and remarkably consistent. Next, consider the often overlooked principle of self-reinforcement. Every internal acknowledgement of alignment strengthens the dominant pattern, celebrating small, internal victories, noting alignment between thought, emotion, and action, and recognizing consistent progress reinforces identity. The law then magnifies these internal victories into further momentum. Most people neglect internal reinforcement, focusing solely on external validation. This is a critical oversight because the law magnifies internal patterns far more reliably than external circumstance. Now let us examine resilience through habitual mental alignment. External challenges are inevitable, yet those aligned internally face obstacles differently. Composed, emotionally reinforced internal patterns interpret setbacks as data, opportunities, and feedback rather than as threats. Resistance diminishes. Momentum continues. Internal alignment produces resilience that appears natural but is carefully constructed over time through deliberate, repeated internal practice. Most people react instinctively to adversity, reinforcing old limiting patterns. Those who apply the law consciously transform adversity into an accelerant for growth. Consider also the principle of internal calibration over time. Your mental system constantly adjusts based on repeated thought, emotional reinforcement, and external feedback. Calibration ensures that dominant internal patterns reflect desired outcomes. If left unattended, unconscious calibration reinforces mediocrity. Conscious, repeated, and emotionally reinforced calibration aligns identity, behavior, and focus, producing results that appear effortless externally but are meticulously orchestrated internally. Most people underestimate this quiet, ongoing process, yet it is one of the most powerful levers of internal mastery. Now, let us examine the interaction of environment and internal alignment. The law magnifies dominant internal patterns, but these are shaped by repeated exposure to ideas, habits, and stimuli. Carefully selecting mental input, books, conversation, observation, media is not optional. It is a multiplier. Repeated positive, clear, and growth-oriented input strengthens internal patterns. Neglecting this leaves the mind vulnerable to reinforcement of limitation. Most people allow unconscious exposure to dominate, reinforcing distraction and reactive patterns, which is why the law often magnifies mediocrity instead of mastery. Next, consider the principle of emotional calibration alongside mental rehearsal. The mind responds most strongly when thought and emotion are combined consistently. Emotional reinforcement charges mental patterns, making them dominant in the subconscious. Repeated, emotionally charged rehearsal strengthens identity, primes behavior, and directs momentum. Most people rehearse mentally without emotional engagement, leaving the law to magnify weaker, less persistent patterns. Emotional calibration is the accelerator, intensity, and depth that converts repetition into dominant internal architecture. Now let us discuss the hidden principle of incremental cumulative mastery. Transformation is rarely instantaneous. It accumulates silently through repeated internal alignment, rehearsal, and consistent action. Momentum compounds internally, long before it manifests externally. Those who abandon early, seeking visible results too soon, fail to experience exponential growth. Persistence, patience, and deliberate repetition are essential. The law magnifies incremental, consistent alignment far more than sporadic bursts of heroic effort. Mastery is the result of quiet accumulation made visible over time. Finally, let us speak about ultimate freedom achieved through mastery of the law. Freedom is not absence of effort or difficulty, but freedom from unconscious limitation, reactive patterns, and habitual frustration. Internal alignment, consistent repetition, emotional reinforcement, and observation produce predictable outcomes externally. The law magnifies internal consistency into inevitable results. Life ceases to feel random. The world becomes an arena for deliberate creation. Those who understand and apply these principles gain control, clarity, and unstoppable momentum over their lives, far beyond what most ever imagined possible. I will pause here. Now, let us examine the often overlooked principle of mental rehearsal in context with real-world action. Most people separate thought from execution. They imagine success occasionally, but they fail to integrate repeated mental practice with deliberate, aligned action. The law magnifies patterns that are both internalized and externally expressed consistently. Mental rehearsal alone shapes identity, but without aligned action, it remains potential energy. Aligned action transforms potential into external manifestation. Most people fail because they neglect either rehearsal or alignment, producing inconsistent or temporary results. Integration of both creates unstoppable momentum that eventually manifests visibly and predictably. Consider the principle of self-observation as a tool for transformation. Every thought, emotional response, and habitual reaction provides feedback on dominant internal patterns. Observing these without judgment creates awareness, and awareness allows deliberate adjustment. Most people avoid observing themselves, fearing discomfort, yet discomfort is temporary. Unconscious patterns remain permanent unless consciously altered. Self-observation, combined with repeated internal alignment and emotional reinforcement, is the mechanism through which mastery becomes intentional rather than accidental. Now let us explore the interaction between internal expectation and persistence. Expectation is not passive wishing. It is a deliberate, internalized anticipation of aligned outcomes. Persistence is the repeated application of thought, emotion, and action toward the chosen pattern. When expectation and persistence converge, momentum builds exponentially. Most people separate expectation from persistence, waiting for motivation or external proof before acting consistently. Those who integrate expectation with persistent alignment experience accelerated, predictable results that appear effortless externally but are carefully constructed internally. Next, consider the power of habitual internal reinforcement. Every repeated acknowledgement of alignment strengthens identity and reinforces dominant patterns. Small, consistent internal victories accumulate into self-trust, composure, and certainty. Most people neglect internal reinforcement, seeking only external validation. The law magnifies internal patterns far more reliably than external circumstance. Conscious reinforcement of alignment is not optional. It is a multiplier of momentum and a safeguard against distraction or doubt. Now let us examine resilience cultivated through repeated internal alignment. External challenges are unavoidable. The law does not eliminate obstacles. It magnifies internal patterns in response to them. Those aligned internally respond with composure, clarity, and strategic action. Resistance diminishes. Momentum continues. Internal alignment produces resilience that seems effortless externally, but is built meticulously over time through repeated mental practice, emotional reinforcement, and consistent action. Most people react instinctively to adversity, reinforcing limitation. Those who apply the law consciously transform adversity into accelerant for growth. Consider also the principle of environmental influence, external input, books, conversations, media, observation, shapes dominant internal patterns over time. The law amplifies whatever patterns are dominant. Carefully selecting constructive, growth-oriented, and focused input accelerates mastery. Neglecting this leaves the mind vulnerable to reinforcing limiting patterns. Most people fail to manage mental input consciously, allowing distraction, fear, or negative influence to dominate. Conscious curation of environment is a powerful multiplier of internal alignment and momentum. Next, examine emotional calibration alongside internal rehearsal. Thoughts alone are insufficient to create dominant internal patterns. Emotion acts as the amplifier, deepening neural imprint and reinforcing identity. Repeated emotionally charged rehearsal primes behavior, strengthens internal momentum, and ensures consistency in action. Most people rehearse without emotion, leaving the law to magnify weak or inconsistent patterns. Emotional calibration is the catalyst that converts repeated thought and aligned action into dominant internal architecture. Now let us discuss incremental mastery and compounding effect over time. Transformation rarely appears instantaneous. It accumulates through repeated internal alignment, rehearsal, observation, and consistent action. Momentum compounds invisibly in the subconscious long before results manifest externally. Those who abandon efforts early, seeking immediate evidence, fail to witness the exponential growth of cumulative alignment. Persistence, patience, and deliberate repetition are non-negotiable. The law magnifies incremental, consistent alignment far beyond sporadic, heroic effort. Mastery emerges quietly, then becomes unmistakable externally. Consider finally the ultimate freedom granted through mastery of this law. Freedom is not the absence of challenge or difficulty, but freedom from unconscious limitation, habitual failure, and reactive patterns. Internal alignment, consistent repetition, emotional reinforcement, observation, and deliberate input produce predictable, coherent outcomes externally. The law magnifies internal consistency into inevitable external results. Life ceases to feel random. The world becomes a canvas for deliberate creation. Those who understand and consistently apply this law gain clarity, control, and unstoppable momentum far beyond what most ever imagined possible. I will pause here.